Aaron McCormick, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Dr. Dave, thanks for having me.
It's really great to have you here. And boy, there's a lot for us to talk about. You've written a book called Unbounded, Your Journey to Within. And I'm interested in your journey, not only the inner one though, but especially your experiences as a Black man from South Side of Chicago who's gone on to incredible success in the world of business and more. So I'd like to start off with that, with your early life in the South Side of Chicago. And of course, I can't help but think of Michelle Obama and probably other notable.
Kanye West, all these public figures from Chicago, yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting that in some ways that background was a rich ground in some ways to grow up in and a stimulus to excel.
It is interesting. I used to wonder, there's a lot that comes from the West Coast and a lot that comes from the center there too. I used to think, is it the heartland of America for that reason? It's about people finding their heart, finding their purpose and ascending. I don't know. But yeah, I was born and raised south side of Chicago. I'm the youngest of four. My parents divorced when I was 3 or 4 years old. And at that time, my mom moved us to Houston, then Phoenix, Arizona, then back to Houston, then back to Chicago. That was about a 6-year period. So 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. So from 3 or 4-ish until 10 or so, I was in those 3 places. And then from 10 on, it was all Chicago. That's where I got my first jobs, plural, started my career, then moved to Texas eventually, and then the career really began to expand from there. But my youth was a relatively challenging one, at the same time, still very happy. I guess that's one of the benefits of youth and children. The glass is always half full. So in the moment, I didn't feel like I was suffering or repressed and all things, but in reality, there were parts of me that definitely were. And later on, I would awaken to things that no longer served me. And maybe they carried a purpose at the time in terms of my own higher self, if you will, or some might call the subconscious, the thing that is driving everything without us really understanding what's happening. But there was a lot of external pressure or suppression, if you will, of whatever I was, and I think we all have various levels of this. So yeah. I had it obviously, from a culture or surrounding energies, whether it be the lowest common denominator mindset of the youth at the time, where it's not cool to get good grades. It isn't in fashion to be sensitive or empathetic, and there's a lot of that kind of pressure. And then, of course, there was the familial pressure of conformity to the very fundamentalist cult or religion I was in, a Christian religion that was so fundamentalist in that they ascribe to following Christ or being Christian, like literally to a T. And to what does that mean? Things like, obviously Christ, the story of Christ, he's a perfect human, and yet he chose to be as the Bible describes it, a relatively lowly carpenter. He had a trade, but he wasn't seeking to be the most successful, affluent attorney in the world, which he obviously could have been if this was a perfect man, or the greatest king ever. He was purely focused on the will of his Father and the future kingdom that would come. So that sort of extreme, exact enactment, if you will, or expectation of all of us in this religion was there. So
I shared some of my background with you before the interview started, and one thing I forgot to share was I also was exposed to evangelical Christianity. My grandmother was was an evangelist, divine healer, speaking in tongues, all of that. So I know what you're talking about. And yes. I want to dig in a little bit more. So your mother, you were mostly raised by a single mom, right?
Correct, yes.
And you mentioned that your father left early, and in the book you mentioned that it was suspected that maybe he suffered from some mental illness. And what was the impact of that story on you?
Interesting question. So I never saw this because obviously at the time of divorcing, I was too young to remember. And then anytime I saw him as a teen or an adult, didn't see any of these traits, traits of paranoia or split personality, anything that my mom implicated was the case. And I assumed those things were true. I don't want to assume it's, bitter divorce between a man and a woman kind of thing, but I had never seen those. But your question is still kind of profound, because the legend, if so to speak, or the stories that was the case made you wonder if it was going to affect you. So you'd have these, besides having almost no example of success, secular success, familial success, a lead, a head in a family, a husband that is, a rock, so to speak.
Right.
Didn't have that, and I didn't have secular success out there. Then I have this potential thing that could, through heredity, supposedly affect me. So it wasn't at the forefront any stretch, but if mom ever brought it up or something, or if it ever came up in any sort of dialogue, you'd go in the back of your mind and go, clock is ticking. Is that going to affect me, kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm wondering, what other kind of worries did you have as a young child, particularly for the period that you were in Southside? Did you go to school in Southside?
I did. So it was the first so we got back, I was around 10. So I did a year or two in the south side of the city. And then the rest of my years were in the south suburbs, which are equally predominantly Black and gang infested. But my high school was also very mixed in that it was in the middle of, I guess, gentrification, the opposite way, in a sense, where, we had probably 60, 70% Black. I think it might be 65, maybe, I guess. And then and then 45% ish white. And a lot of those kids were, very college bound, college focused, high academia. And then we also had some Black kids that were that way too. But we also had a lot of gangs. So I really got to see the entire spectrum. And I was very cool with the entire spectrum, if you will. I was cool with the gangbangers while I didn't gangbang myself. Knew handshakes because that was what was in vogue, all that kind of thing. At the same time, I was not very studious. I did not have I was not scholastic. I didn't love schoolwork. And I also had a innate wisdom, apparently, again, in hindsight. I didn't think I was above school. I just didn't have a desire to go to college because, of course, I was also taught that that's not in my future. And when you get a scapegoat of not having to do more work, and you have this theological reason that supposedly has to do with your salvation, it allows you to latch onto that and kind of use that as your basis for not really caring. So that was easy for me to do as well. So I was in between all these different.
Yeah, you had some street skills, street smarts, sort of interpersonal intelligence, and that allowed you to, I'm guessing, talk your way out of situations, maybe, if things got tight.
Well, more than talk, I mean, and if you're talking about that kind of thing, like, fighting and all that kind of stuff, I mean, I understood somehow bullies are in lack of heart. I didn't think of it in these exact words, but I knew that they were all talk mostly. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. I learned how to talk my shit, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm trying to respect the dignity of your show. But the point is, I had a rough side that I would allow to come out that wasn't really how I wanted to operate, but I knew how to do it and defend my own as I needed to. But by and large, I mean, I was very just authentically me, and I was a bit of a bridge of sorts because I wasn't in any one strong sort of group. I was not considered nerdy. I was not on the quote nerd side. I was definitely not considered a roughneck, gangbanger, that kind of thing. I also wasn't an athlete on teams because that was also discouraged and not allowed, even though I was extremely athletic. Like in 8th grade, I was voted most athletic boy. I could have played 3 sports in high school and been the best player on all 3 teams. I'm not, being egotistical. I mean, I was that gifted, but I didn't get to play any sports. So I was kind of in between it all. And in my senior year, in the work program, where when you have enough credits, you can get out early and go to a job and get credit. All the boys, Dr. Dave, were in either distributed education, which is a work program where you either work in retail or some sort of logistics. You can work somewhere near the house, make $10 plus an hour at a UPS. So you make more money and you do masculine, burly things. Or you might be in something like I selected, and I was the only male that selected OE, which is office education. So that's code for keyboarding, right? So I'm in the yearbook surrounded by all the girls, because I knew, you're talking about social intelligence. I knew, look, typing is like language. If you can't type, how are you going to communicate as the world evolves? So I didn't care that I could be perceived as feminine or something, because look at me, I'm a future secretary. Didn't matter to me. That's another one of the many examples looking back where I was more in line with what I felt rather than the fear of the result of dissenting from something around me. And I think we all tend to either be, ego mind driven, or we tend to be more anchored to our source.
Well, what pulled you through? What saved you? Did you have any role models or any support for that way of being that you were feeling inside yourself?
No.
No.
No. In fact, my entire family, so there's two things to be saved from. There's the elements of the community, so to speak, the prevailing attitudes that affect inner city kids, young Black youth, the whole mantra or the disinformation that intelligence and being smart and being kind, all those things make you white.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of subliminally encouraged through the music that is pushed and supported by big business, all these kind of things, to be this sort of person. So when you ask about saving me, there's saving me from that element. And the other part is saving me from not living my truth, being very suppressed. So my family is still stuck in that religious cult, still highly controlled. I mean, my family has not even met my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old children, because in their minds, having left or having decided that form of worship isn't for me. I didn't say I don't believe in God. I simply recognize that form of totalitarian governance control does more damage than helps people. And I, as an empath, can't be a part of something that is harming people. And I won't do that anymore. But I love everybody else. Well, that has resulted in none of my family or friends are in my life. I lost 2,000 people that I've come to know across multiple states in my whole history of living at 39, when I woke up and realized what it really was and the damage that it really does. And I made my decision to leave. So the answer is, I had no familial support. I had no external support. There was none.
Yeah. So this is somehow, your book is all about the within and listening to the within. And somehow that was a gift that you were born with, I would say. And, I've interviewed other people who have broken out of cults of one sort or another. And that is a really hard thing to do, particularly, as you suggested, the loss of relationships of the people who you knew growing up and so on, and who, so that's a big decision to cut loose from all of that. And you said you were the youngest. You had 3 sisters?
2 older brothers, 1 older sister.
Okay. And they're all still in that, under the influence of that cultish version of Christianity?
Essentially, yes. The middle brother is still doesn't believe anymore, but he has too much fear to formally, make his exit. But he's highly frustrated dealing with the element that is a part of that. And so to me, that's a worse hell. I'm far more happy and more fulfilled, even without all those things, because this is part of what I talk about in the book, Dr. Dave. It's like every other conflict we have, whether it's with a friend, spouse, co-workers, bosses, they're all separable, right? Meaning you can get your temporary or permanent separation from those things. But conflict with your truth, you can't literally split yourself. You can't hide from not voices, but energy, as well as the sometimes thought that says, why did I say that? Or why didn't I stand up and say this? Or why am I still at this job, in this relationship? Why do I surround myself with these people when I feel a certain way? It's because of the fear of loss. It's the fear of starting over. It's the fear of not having your value, all these things. So, in his case, I feel for him, because he's even more torn. He hasn't found his peace yet with standing in his truth.
Yeah.
But basically, he's technically still in, and all of them are. But the other 3 and my mom deeply believe. So the middle brother will speak to me. Our energies are very off in the sense that he's more victim and he's more frustrated and bitter and just a totally different energetic disposition. And we talk about this, so this is nothing new. We understand our differences, but with the other family, there's zero communication whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah, that's sad. Have you been in any psychotherapy along the road?
No.
No. I know it's because in many ways the things that you talk about in your book certainly are in alignment with a lot of different schools of psychotherapy and so on. And I know that in the Black community, psychotherapy is generally suspect as being a white thing. And were you ever tempted to, was that an option for you ever to think about?
Well, an option as a child and as an adult. As a child, I don't recall it coming up.
Right, right.
Single mom with no benefits, that's not something that, you don't always get the best medical treatment, let alone something more exotic like psychotherapy kind of thing.
Right.
And then as an adult, I guess because I never had feelings of inadequacy or feelings of loss or the absence of a father. And during being in religion, you think that's your utopia. So of course, in that state, you're not for want of anything. You think that you have it all because you've got God's favor and etc. So all that period, there was never a external reason. I was very successful. I was making $500,000 a year at 22, 23. I considered myself happily married to my first wife at the time. I was very healthy otherwise. And then, when I realized that this was not a fit for me, and I felt even more connected and more balanced and more at peace within with everything that I was deciding to do. And I realized how everything in all of our lives is serving us. So this is where I kind of bridge the physical journey, the physical intellect and decisions and societal paradigms with the esoteric, the things that we all wonder about, have thought about, felt, from deja vu to ears ringing and somebody calls you, that kind of phrase, the psychic connectivity that we all have with each other, energetic connectivity. So I'm bridging the things that we know by fact and the things that we've always suspected, and until it becomes a proof to you, a reality to you, because there's too many synchronicities and there's too many ways that things that you didn't realize served you actually did, and things that you realize made you actually didn't make you. That was your perception of what was making you. In reality, you already are what you are. You are self-contained, but we come into a paradigm that implicates we're not, and that's the whole point of the struggle or the challenge that we've decided to undertake.
You made a jump there to 22, 23, making $500,000. So how do we get there? To take us through what are the stepping stones to that place?
In high school, I thought I wanted to be an auto mechanic. I've loved cars since I was 3, 4 years old, maybe 4 or 5, I guess, knew the stats and all that. And so logically, you think, okay, I'll work on these things. That didn't work out. I didn't enjoy it very much. Then I thought I'll do computer programming. World is going to computers, logically. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. Again, this is based upon the external stimulus that says that's where trends will be, that's where money will be. And I took a class in high school, created something from nothing. That was interesting. That appealed to my analytics side, but I couldn't see myself doing that on the regular. I think that's a big misstep that we make, is we back into jobs and careers based upon the supposed outcome. We don't completely envision the day-to-day experience and then live in that experience in the mind, so to speak, and decide if that experience aligns with you. And I'm very interpersonal, as you can see, as you can read. And even when I was a baby, the family would tell me that I would stare, intently at people's mouths, wanting to talk, wanting to understand. I'm 1 year old, 1.5, that kind of thing. So in hindsight, again, it makes sense. So I just decided, Dr. Dave, I go, okay, I need to be doing something perhaps even more complex than computers, in that it's dealing with humans. So I either need to be teaching, selling. If I were not hampered by the religion, I would have been maybe an attorney. It could have been that, could have been a psychologist. A lot of people have said that, but those were kind of off limits because there was no college, opportunity. So I thought, okay, training or sales. And I picked sales with technology. I said, why not merge the programming aspect with selling? And I realized that everything is sales. Every CEO is selling. You're bridging disparate ideals or, different agendas, perspectives, whether it's employees, board members, stockholders, that kind of thing. And you're trying to bring a coalescence, if you will, toward a common cause. That's selling. And so I just said, I'll do sales, right? And then it snowballed from there. I went from.
Did you have any college at that point or ever?
No, in fact, I made my first million in a 12-month period without college. I ended up deciding to get an MBA at 37. And then I graduated at 39. It's a 2-year executive MBA program with a very good schools, SMU in Texas and Dallas. And most, believe it or not, most really strong MBA programs, they do have in their executive MBA program will allow you to get an MBA without a degree, an undergrad, provided you are already MBA worthy, meaning you're already a professional, you're executive level or executive level income, you got letters of recommendations, that kind of thing. So I built myself to that and went from, making huge money without a degree to the same trajectory, but with a degree. So that if I ever wanted to start a big corporation or, a corporation that would become large and substantial, I felt like I would know all the different aspects from accounting and finance and HR and law.
Yeah.
That's why I chose to get an MBA late in life.
Yeah. So $500,000, $1 million. How are you doing that?
I was selling enterprise software. So this is software that runs various departments for a company. It might be to the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer. Early on, it was to the VP of Operations or the COO, sometimes the CEO of telecommunications companies. So this was a vertical ERP, which if you think of ERP, that's Enterprise Resource Planning. That's like SAP. These are big companies or software that manages inventory and the supply chain, if you will, for a corporation. Where this initial software I sold at 22 was that for emerging telecommunications companies, and it covered the whole operational spectrum, multiple departments. So I was the youngest in the company. I was in my software company. I was 22, 23. The average age was 35 on up to 50. They were all white. They all had degrees. And I talk about what on earth would possess the VP of sales to hire a kid who would sit in front of the C-suite. These are C-level executives that have children older than me in many cases, right? And I'm going to advise them on the operational efficacy of their department and make it better. And they're going to bet millions on me. And if it fails, it could be their job. And that's just a weird thing for him to expect a kid to have that kind of,
And as a kid, were you scared? Were you going through any kind of imposter syndrome of feeling like,
Scared in what way? How do you mean?
Did you feel insecure about what you were doing?
Oh, you mean what I was, okay, when you say kid, I thought you meant back when I was a kid. You mean at this point in time? No, I actually didn't. Not at all. And I think that's why I was so successful there. I mean, if I were going through imposter syndrome, the confidence of clients to invest in me would be not there at all. I mean, even when you're the same age, sales transactions happen through energy. I mean, if there's not a connection, then there's fear. And where there's fear, people won't want to invest. Simple as that. You don't invest money that you're afraid might not pan out, right? So it's all energy. So the fact that I was completely comfortable in my skin, the fact that I took a very empathic approach, I was all about incisive questions, more so than just grandstanding. I wasn't quick to get into my PowerPoint. So I was basically, Dr. Dave, in every way, the antithesis of the typical sales approach, even physically. They're looking at a young black dude, not a mature white guy, and he's coming at them in a way that is completely comfortable in their own skin, and he's asking questions rather than grandstanding with all this stuff right away. And all of that proverbial helped clients go from, being like this figuratively, like, who are you and why should I buy, to, open, and now they're sharing their problems. Now I can help consult and fix the problems. And so from the beginning, I was number one year after year, and then it just took off from there.
I guess we have to back up just a little bit. Or at any place in your life, did you feel disadvantaged by being black? Did you experience racial prejudice because of the color of your skin?
I never felt it, though I would experience it. So I'll give three examples that lead up to 21, up until 21 that I experienced that I can remember. Uh, our neighborhood that we moved into when I was 10 or 11, when we came back to Chicago, within the first month there, somebody spray painted. It was a small community. The city had decent amount of blacks, very mixed. The small subdivision was mostly white. And somebody spray painted "nigger suck" on our driveway. And I just painted it black, because the driveway was blacktop. It rolled right off my back. It literally didn't really have an effect on me. That's experience number one that I can recall. And then at about 21 or 2, actually 22-ish, when I'm with that company selling these big ticket software programs, I remember going into a room, and actually let me go before that. I'm 19 and I'm with a computer consulting company in Chicago. This is when I'm making maybe 80K and I'm 19 years old. This is before I move into the big software, because now I'm selling services, and I'm in Chicago before I move to Dallas. And I make an appointment to visit this company, and the guy says to me, I gotta be honest, you're not what I thought. Or he said something like this. And I was so oblivious. I was thinking, okay, I want to put my best foot forward on business, and maybe there was extra resonance in my voice. So I said, Dr. Dave, oh, what, you thought I was like tall, like 6 foot or something? Because I'm 5'7", and I wasn't being facetious. I really thought maybe that's what he was thinking. And he goes, well, no, I didn't realize you were black. He said something like this, and that was the first time in corporate context that, and that's pretty overt for him to just come out and say that. And again, that rolled off my back. I did well at that job and did think nothing of it. And then the second time was really just myself. I was in a meeting. This is now with the software company selling the big ticket stuff. And I've got a team of 4 or 5 that I marshal, that I command in my company to help bring about a deal. They're subject matter experts. They have big degrees and they're technical people, whatever. And they support, I'm the quarterback of this deal. We go into a client and there's 15, 20 people there from the client. Everyone from power users to the directors to the VPs that'll make a decision. And so I'm the chair of this room because we're the vendor. There's several other vendors that also compete that show up and do the same kind of song and dance. And I remember looking at the table, and as I look around the table at the hands on the table, it just kind of consciously hit me, mine are the only dark hands at the table.
Yeah.
Even though I've always known this, Dr. Dave, I have a very black experience. I mean, I'm proud of my blackness. Everything about my black side is fully intact.
Yeah.
But I never looked out of my skin back at me with a fear or with a woe is me or with a concern. I'm so in the moment looking out. I'm just a soul that is communicating with the souls around me. If the souls around me are going to be all this or that, it is what it was. But that was, I remember, a very salient moment where I go, I thought I was just espousing strong ideals or asking great questions and solving a problem. I now actually realize the packaging here is that I'm a bit of an anomaly in this context.
Yeah.
So there was that. And then later on in life, there was something that is still going on as we speak. So I'm not at liberty to talk about it in great detail, but ironically, as I was transitioning from purely doing secular, make companies a whole bunch of money, make a whole lot of money for myself, now I'm moving into the arts, trying to help, and I'm publishing a book, and I want to speak and just help humanity. Something very overt happened, where there's a lawsuit in process, actually.
Oh.
Never happened in my life.
Yeah.
So that's pretty significant, that did happen. I'm not able to talk about it in detail, but by and large, I believe we attract what we're focused on.
Yeah.
And that was never a thought. I really saw the world according to merit, and I thought that all of us, what we want, what we believe, becomes our reality. And I didn't teach myself these terms I'm saying to you. I just felt them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, as I listen to you, it's not surprising that you've been as successful as you are. I mean, it's surprising in the sense of breaking stereotypes, but it's not surprising in terms of the way that you came to it, just with such open energy and just being yourself, and I think that's the magic sauce. and also that it's so unusual, for there are not a lot of black men. There are a lot of very successful black men, particularly in sports and in the arts and so on. Increasingly, I think, in business. Um, but still, at that particular point in time, as you say, you were an anomaly, and it was like, wow, who is this guy? Let's go ahead with him.
Yeah, it's ironic. I think there's a shortage of people in general that are living their authentic selves.
Yeah.
The difference is when you are a minority and you're not as internally anchored, it's even harder to achieve the outward success.
Yeah, yeah.
When the paradigm looks a certain way, you can all be kind of, a little bit off center or a little bit kind of showing off or putting on this, as you called it. I think you referred to it as a, how'd you say it? Where you're not make believe, but you're.
I know what you're referring to.
You're asking me if I felt like, imposter. Yeah.
Yes,
so
imposter syndrome.
Everybody has imposter syndrome. Yeah. All of them, all of us, most professionals. LinkedIn, I see it all day long. In fact, it kind of depresses me sometimes when I read some of the posts on LinkedIn because they all have this outward fake facade. The difference is it's even easier for that facade to get you places when there's no risk of difference, meaning people are averse to change. So when you look the same, you can be as flaky or fakey or inauthentic as you want to be, but it's easy to accept you. When you're that way and you're black and you don't have the extra power, or you're any minority, you're an immigrant, anything that is, like in the space of technology sales, it's absent Indian, because again, if you have an accent and you're communicating with, white middle-aged men, the fear of that Indian would be, they're more likely to go with somebody that looks like them. They have more in common with them. Their lifestyle is similar. Their religion is similar. They go play golf the same. So very competent people, whether it's women who are obviously different or minorities, will say, let me just stick to something where my performance, I can purely run customer care, or I can purely be an accountant, VP of HR. But in sales, someone has to actually like and trust me. And I don't know if that's possible. So they assume that of themselves, so they don't enter it. That's one of the reasons why we're absent, especially in sales.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look at what's going on in the world right now, particularly the Black Lives Matter movement, social justice for everyone, etc. There is I think the word uprising has been used, and I think that's a really significant word, that there's a mass uprising, and plenty of people on the white side of the fence can see that and are joining in and saying, whoa, there's a lot that's unfair here, particularly as all of these police actions and so on come to light,
Right.
How are you dealing with that both internally and externally? I'll leave it there.
Well, my heart goes out and has been going out to everybody. When I watch the emotional roller coaster that it seems like the world has been put on, particularly in the United States, of course. I mean, without question, racism exists, as does sexism, as does nationalism in terms of, discriminating people according to their nationality or being an immigrant. All those things exist, gay, lesbian, so it's all there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that BLM has exacerbated it, and the media, mass media, I think, has created more division, more problems, more violence, more death than the topic is claiming.
How so?
Well, the topic it's claiming to be about is police killing unarmed Black people. The topic isn't purely about race equality. It's Black Lives Matter. So I believe that racism still exists. I've felt it. In some ways, I paid the cost more than average. Maybe more of that will come out and be public later on. But so I'm not delusional about that. But this notion of officers killing unarmed Black people is a complete farce. I mean, like, I know the actual data, and most people don't know that in 2019, there were more unarmed white men killed than blacks, full stop. Now, granted, it was double the amount, and these numbers are still tiny, by the way, relative to 230 million people in the country. So there were 20-something unarmed white men killed, of which we don't know any of their names, by the way. And then there was 10 to 14. I think I've heard two different numbers, 10 and 14. I think the 14 is total black people, and the 10 might have been the men. But either way, 14 or so blacks that were killed. And if the media reported on the whites, it would obviously cool down this notion that it only happens to blacks. So what's happening is, and by the way, if anyone Googled the name Tony Timpa, Timpaa, this was a white man, unarmed, killed similar to George Floyd, that never saw the light. You'll see the video clip, by the way, never made mainstream media, and he was killed for no apparent reason whatsoever. My heart goes out to that family even more so because this happened and it got zero coverage. And then you have a guy like George Floyd, who didn't deserve to die by any stretch, but he actually was also a dude that forced his way into a pregnant woman's house at gunpoint. I mean, he was really an actually bad dude. Didn't deserve to die, but a bad dude. And when he's killed by the cops, the whole world knows his name. You know, we can all name 2 or 3 or 4 black people killed by cops, but not the 24 of the whites. And even if, you know, even at 20, and also nobody knows that, most don't realize, the total number of unarmed people killed by officers in 2019 was less than the total number of officers killed in line of duty. There was a total of like 49 or so of every race, unarmed, killed by an officer out of 330 million people. So when I watch the whole country get divided, and I watch innocent business owners and innocent cops and people being killed, we've already far surpassed the number of innocent, or not innocent, the number of unarmed people killed by officers, for reason or not. We're way past that in the so-called standing up against it. And the actual number of blacks was so minuscule, and it's half the number of whites. I mean, I go on and on and on. So the point is, it seems clear to me that, and when I watch the whites that are empathetically standing up, my heart goes out to them because I love the fact that they have this energy to want to fight for a cause that isn't even affecting them directly per se. But then I'm also troubled because I'm going, there's a false guilt laid upon them, and it's creating more separatism. Dr. Dave, this happened in the park just about 3 weeks ago. A mother of a 4-year-old boy said this to my wife, the mother of our 4-year-old boy. She told her, and they made each other's acquaintance a couple times at the park. She said, I told my son that he's got to be nicer to Colton, my son, because he's black. You know, and she thought she was doing a very good thing, and her heart meant well. She went on to say that she had been raised in a very diverse area. She never felt this way. So basically, she doesn't have a racist bone in her body, and she's never felt this way. But the media has made her to feel you're racist even if you don't think you are. You better bow down, kneel down, and apologize for what you stand for, your privilege, all this other stuff. And so now she's actually teaching her son racism, because the 4-year-old boy then says, through deductive reasoning, if I got to be nice to you because you're black, and I got to do that because you've had a harder experience than me, because you're black, must be better to look this way than look that way. So you've created division, you've created condescension, you've created a problem. So, you know, this is a pet peeve of mine, because under the guise of altruism, we're actually creating more division. And it's not we, it's really mass media, and it is maybe the people behind specifically the BLM movement that have exacerbated this notion that we're just being killed in the street like animals, which furthermore, Dr. Dave, would make a guy like you or any other mature white man feel like, I don't want my son or daughter to get too involved with a black person, because even if I'm not racist, man, life is hard for them. Look at this. Even cops will just kill them. And that is just complete untruth. But that's how I think more division.
One of the things that what you're saying brings up in me is the notion of emotional contagion. And I think the fact that we have mass media now and can see so much that we could never see before,
Yeah.
leads to a kind of
Wait.
emotional contagion and even hysteria.
Totally.
And so
It's funny you
there's
say
a
hysteria.
downside to being as connected electronically, and the media wise as we are, is that things can flare up really fast.
And you multiply it because you've distributed, you've propagated what was localized. It's funny
Yes.
you mentioned hysteria. Fathers have said to me about my boy, Aaron, aren't you teaching him the reality of how he really is with cops, of what he's got to be thinking about and worried about? I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I'm like, 10 out of 40 billion blacks is a lower probability of being struck by lightning on a sunny day, right? I'm like, why would I put in my son's mind that he might get accosted, beaten, or killed by a cop because of his color when 99.9% of cops are actually serving and protecting?
Yeah.
We'll never be able to eradicate the random murderer, whether they're a cop or a teacher or a parent. Murdering idiots exist, but I'm not going to have them focus on that.
Yeah.
So that's the hysteria you mentioned,
Yeah. That's well, I think you make some very good points, and it's a different perspective that we don't hear very much. So,
well, it's
well,
not a popular one.
I know you probably want to talk about your book. I think you've been able to get some of it in here, but what do you want people? I'm interested in your transition to becoming a motivational speaker, a motivational coach, etc. And you must have read a lot of books or gone to seminars or something to pick up a lot of that world, because you're really in that world now.
No, I haven't actually. I probably will be getting virtual assistant help and coaching, and in terms of the business aspects of it, because I'm a fiscal business dude in the areas of business. So purely capitalization, ROI, making money for corporations through technology. In this context, there's some technical knowledge that I might need to be absorbing, and I have been absorbing. But in terms of the things inside of me that I want everyone to know about themselves, I consider universal truth. I don't consider myself bringing them anything new. I do believe it's coming to their consciousness, but I'm not some inventor of perspectives or some knowledge, because this is, like I say, it's just universal truth.
Yeah.
And we experience it when we look back and we just go within. So the book is meant to take you on a journey to your within. It's not a biography of me, as I mentioned, and it's not a bunch of motivational rah-rah, think this way and do this. That doesn't serve. That's just stuff that goes in the mind. And the mind is exactly what also has created all of these facades that think will bring you what you want and still don't somehow. The answer is, how do you get congruency with the other force? And then how do you balance the two? Well, that's a very personal journey. It's different from you, it's different from me. And so how does a person get acquainted and get experience, get proficient at following their actual truth, and to knowing when something is an external thing that won't serve them versus something that actually will. So, that's really what the book is about. And then the other question I think you asked was the transition. So throughout my life, Dr. Dave, I've always, like I said, I was the anti-bully. I went to my high school reunion. People were telling me stories of grammar school and high school where I would come to their aid and stick up for them or whatever. And most of them I don't even remember. But I know I hate seeing suffering. I hate seeing injustice, and I hate seeing it at the hands of ourselves. When you know how you love somebody more than they love themselves. At least it seems that way. You want the best for them, and they can't see it, and they've got depression. Of course, you know this because you're a psychologist. So I've always had personal challenge with this, or I didn't like seeing it. So people would come to me with their issues all throughout my life. I mean, and I would ask questions that were pretty insightful, and they got more incisive. Incisive is the better word. They got more incisive the older I got, because the more experience and conscious wisdom I had. Yeah. The innate wisdom we all already have, and that wisdom is infinite. But the becoming more consciously available to you is a gradual thing. So people were asking me issues about their relationships, their jobs and careers, family stuff. It was like I was a magnet for people to divulge otherwise very personal, challenging things. And then I would ask these questions that they would ask themselves. They would get their clarity, and off they'd go. They would finally be unstuck. They would switch careers. I mean, I've instigated several people quadrupling their income inadvertently just through conversation with them. And it's just by them following the thing that was right at the surface, telling them what the answer is, but the mind was pushing it down, and finally it kind of bubbles up in a different way. Yeah. So I decided, rather than help people ad hoc, if you will, onesie twosie, why not, make do it in a macro way, create a manual that takes us through these big aspects or areas of life where we question and we're unsure and we're kind of leading a false narrative, living a false narrative to ourselves, and get your answers without needing some other external thing all the time to tell you the answer. Ideally, if you read the book and you do the exercises in it, you become self-sufficient where you don't need some external thing to tell you, what's best for you at any given point. You can feel it and you can deduce it and you can go in that direction.
Give us an example of an exercise.
An example of an exercise. Let's see, which topic? You want to do love? Do you want to do self? Do you want to do career? I'll do career because that's a hot button right now. Okay. I'll do career. So again, we back into our careers based upon an intellectual decision. It's almost always the case. And sometimes it's led by the heart, and those are usually artistic, careers. But usually it's people researching on trends and industry and all that kind of thing. If we're stewards of our life and we're CEOs, then the question is, how are we managing our resources? What's our most valuable resource? Time. Time is infinitely more valuable than money, because without time, there's no love, there's no family love, there's no anything without time. So we all are therefore trillionaires, billionaires, whatever the big number you want to pick, because we all have the same amount of time. So then the question becomes, how are you spending your resource of time? And now we're going to get into the aspect of work. If you're working a job or career that you have no heart connection, heart meaning you want to do it, you would do it even if it were no pay, or big aspects of it you would still do without pay because it's natural, right? If you're working a job that doesn't have that kind of connection, then you are effectively squandering your time, and you're doing it out of a fear of requirement to have to do it. So then you got to say, all right, now that I've realized that I'm misaligned and I'm squandering my time, how do I change that when I got to pay bills? When I actually have to do these things. So I actually take you through some steps that you ask yourself so that you can figure out how you might gradually move into doing something that is more fulfilling to you, and therefore usually brings money along with it. But even if it doesn't bring extra money, if you've done the exercises and you realize some of these things that I think are necessities are things that the mind has been taught define me, prove me, or make me successful. But if you're missing these 5 or 10 other things that you'd rather be doing with your time, then you actually are not successful and you're squandering your wealth. So that's why I talk about there are guys that make girls that make 30, 40 grand a year that are highly abundant, that are way more successful, rich, so to speak, than some of I know people worth $500 million and everything in between. Some of the guys in my exotic car clubs, because I've always had exotic cars, Lamborghinis and stuff, and half of them are broke up in terms of their personal abundance. And so therefore the abundance, the monetary stuff becomes their only reward system. And they keep trying to, so you have these grown men that are super into these shallow things because the real thing isn't there. And this is all they have to show for it. So that becomes their anchor. So I take you through exercises on how to get your real fulfillment in your business and whatever it is you do with your time and the money to come with it. I do that same kind of thing across relationships and across understanding yourself.
Yeah, good job. Let's wrap up with the pandemic. How's the pandemic impacting your life, your family, and what are you doing to, stay sane in all of the craziness that's going on?
The pandemic is kind of the plandemic, because again, if you look at data, so I'm gonna have an interesting, bridging sort of way, in the sense that I'm actually physically ambidextrous, and I'm physically able to kind of tap logic and spirit, if you will. And it's pretty clear to me, just on data alone, that every 4 years or so, there is a large pandemic. And in this case, bigger than ever. And there are reasons I've learned for that. And I've channeled these reasons. It makes sense because I've watched world events. So whether it's SARS or Nile or you name it, it's interesting how they all happen on an election year. So there's that piece right there. Then there's the data. Then there's the data of, like you talked about, the whole paranoia. So fear is a lot easier to invoke than power and optimism. And that's why our world seems to be highly slanted toward fear. Fear and division and clashing, from reality TV to the news is 29 minutes of bad and 1 minute of look what something good that happened. So that's the narrative, that's the paradigm we're in. Yeah. And I think nature or God or Mother Earth, whatever you want to call it, forces bigger than us, is now about to level that out and take us from being more dark to being more balanced. And I think the future is actually very bright on the heels of this thing. But as I look at the data itself, I'm extremely appalled at how, we'll throw out these numbers. The media throws out the numbers of people infected. What they never throw out is how that is in comparison to the total population. Like, even as they keep saying 170,000 people have died. And I'm going, yeah, but we have 330 million in the country. There are hundreds of thousands of people that die from everything. In fact, more people die from taking a poop. More people, 1.6 million people, I'm being funny there, but 1.6 million people have died from diarrhea-related illness than the pandemic proportionally. So for the amount of time the pandemic has been here, the 6 months or whatever, more people will have died from diarrhea-related illness than from this pandemic. Same thing with things like, not measles, the other one?
Smallpox.
I forgot. No, not that one. There's another one, but or might even be measles. The point is, you look at these numbers and you go, so what? And then not only those that are infected, but the people infected have a 98% chance of survival, and even the ones that die, all sorts of information is coming out that their deaths have been wrongfully attributed to COVID. Doctors are coming out saying that they've never before been this coerced to label the cause of death something like they are now. Hospitals are getting incrementally $30,000, $40,000 per pandemic death, that kind of stuff. So it's like, and this is mainstream, because everybody trusts mainstream. If it's not from some so-called credible source, it's conspiracy. All this stuff has been covered, just not as significantly as the main narrative to keep people in this period of fear. So, Dr. Dave, I view this period, both the civil unrest, the pandemic, as something of a dark night of the soul, the collective soul, which is where people, when they have an awakening individually, whether it's a near-death experience or whether it is a series of events, something about their personal journey shows them unequivocally that there is more to this than I ever thought, and that I'm actually in a better state than I ever realized, because I'm not just my physical journey. And then they start to vibe very differently. They have a lot less fear. They're a lot more, all these different things are expanded. Collectively, we are going through some of the most fearful things that people could have imagined, from no income to civil unrest and murder and death from disease, all this stuff. Nobody knows where the world is headed. And if you stay in that state long enough, you eventually transmute the fear, because you don't, it's not sustainable. So you find other ways for joy. You find ways to get out of that mindset, hopefully at least. And as a result, you're stronger on the other side. So the darkness is actually serving us. So for us, we happen to be in an area that's not overly fear mongering, but by and large, we still see children in masks, people jogging, people in parks in masks, and it makes no logical sense. It just shows how the programming is so strong and the fear is so strong. And hopefully, I think we'll enter a period where that's not the case.
Are you personally, do you wear a mask when you go out or not?
No.
No, because I guess I'm caught up in that. I'm worried about it.
Oh, right. Because, well, again, number one, the actual amount of deaths is no different than a typical flu. The actual number of doctors that have confirmed, put their careers on the line, hundreds of them, independent doctors, have spoken about the lethality, both the lethality of it being extremely low, as well as the volume that's being reported being inaccurate, how they're being coerced. So even if the volume was accurate, I'm not going to change my entire behavior and my children and suppress myself over what is 0.1% or some tiny number of probability of affecting me and my family. Because there's a small percentage of likelihood that anything can happen. We go outside right now, there's a 0.1% chance that we get in a car accident. Does that mean I don't drive? Or I can get murdered? Or there's all these different things, and the data just doesn't support that a mask is in any way beneficial. Not to mention all the continued flip-flopping. Fauci has said masks are useless. Multiple times he has said this. This is a lifelong doctor, and they're completely useless. But then the puppet masters pull the string and go, People have to suffer. This has got to be very dark so that we create a different outcome. If people suffer enough, they'll contrast that suffering with a different regime, and maybe we'll get the voting outcome that we want. I mean, so one of the benefits of having not been a voter my entire life is that I've never had a bias, and I still am independent. I mean, I've never voted in my entire life. I've always been this so-called, according to religion, it's all about Christ. And if Christ didn't vote, Christ didn't choose to be an official politician, then I have no attachment to that. I'll just let God take care of it. So I don't have these narratives of Republican is this, Democrat is that. I have a clean slate. And when I looked at all this and I can just see the gamesmanship and the fakery on both sides and the mass manipulation, it's extremely clear to me. And so, like I say, my heart goes out to those that are overly affected by BLM and sad about it and worried about blacks and the injustice. Worry about basic discrimination. Don't worry about us being shot in mass, because that's a complete lie. But if you don't like the discrimination, just put it in your heart that we're all equal and you just act different. I mean, you just act honest, in truth to yourself, and you're fine. You don't need to do anymore. When it comes to COVID, same deal. It's like it's complete farce to me, complete nonsense.
Wow.
But I get why others are in fear of it because, again, we've got constant programming telling us something different. And it is what it is. What can I say?
Yeah. Well, that's a very different perspective than I've heard anywhere else, but I'm really glad to hear it from you. And I'm going to have to think about everything that you've said here. So, Aaron McCormick, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I wish you more success. I don't know if you need any more success, but.
Oh, well, peace. The thing we wish is peace. And yes, definite success, abundance. I mean, I wish the same to you. I love what you're doing. So clearly you love what you do. You're doing it because you want to do it.
Yeah.
You got to do it. And you're helping people. So I love that. I love talking to people like yourself.